The chamber smelled of old power, preparing to rehearse its certainty. The 9 delegates sat in a crescent of polished obsidian, their upper mandibles and shimmering crest plumes angled downward at the hologram of the approaching Terran flotilla. Just 67 ships, each tagged in the archive as obsolete. To them, humanity remained a solved problem, exiled, diminished, predictable. Today was meant to be a formality, a ritual scolding wrapped in diplomatic ceremony before the processing protocols resumed. Counselor Wraith of the Karth Dominion leaned forward, 4 eyes narrowing. Primitive alloy hulls, manual thruster arrays. Their exile clearly froze advancement. We should thank them for staying simple. Soft laughter rippled through the chamber, dry, brittle, confident. Even the holotech smirked. 9 species had voted humanity out 7 centuries ago, and 7 centuries had only hardened their belief that humans were relics trapped behind the walls they built for them. "They arrive late," muttered Counselor Rez. "Typical." He tapped a glyph, pulling up a magnified sensor band. Thermal signatures minimal, reactor efficiency stagnant. They have not evolved. More nods, more quiet mockery. Someone muttered the old slur, processing stock. A junior aide, barely out of her apprentice cycle, dared to whisper, "Their formation remains unnervingly tight." Wraith dismissed her with a click of his jaw. Even relics remember parade drills. The council's central display bloomed into a tactical mesh. The 4,900-ship greeting armada, sleek spires of gravitivic brilliance, formed a luminous cradle around the incoming Terrans. Every hull shimmered with a confidence built on centuries of unchallenged superiority. Only the humans sat dark and silent, their profiles a study in outdated geometry. "Activate intimidation pattern," Wraith ordered. Holo officers executed the sequence. 12 heavy cruisers drifted forward, aligning their emitters for a ceremonial flare burst designed to shake low-grade shielding. "A reminder of scale," Rez added smugly. The aide frowned at her console. "Their shield frequencies don't match the archive." "Of course they don't," Wraith snapped. "They degrade, they drift, they fail." Static fluttered. Numbers rolled. Something tightened in the air. A punchline cut the silence. "Relics? Really?" The flare burst hit the Terran line like a small star detonation, white arcs spilling across hulls. Every delegate leaned in, expecting fractures, scatter, retreat. But the readings sharpened, and the room froze. 93% absorbed, 7% redirected. Not dispersed, not blocked, redirected. Rez's crests folded in confusion. Impossible. Their materials weren't capable of that even before exile. The aide swallowed. It wasn't shielding. It was shaping. Wraith waved the suggestion away, but his voice had lost a shade of certainty. "Irrelevant. Continue with the protocol. They will comply." Yet the 67 Terran ships did not shift, did not flicker, did not answer in any language known. They simply held formation, unaltered, unbecoming, unbothered, as if the armada around them were a curiosity rather than a threat. Another stinger dropped into the quiet. Intimidation failed. For the first time, unease pulled behind the council's flawless composure. The formation that should have scattered stood tireless. The exile that should have broken them had not. And the 9 species who had once judged humanity as manageable now stared at sensor lines that told a colder truth. The humans were not here to kneel. They were here to speak in the only language the old powers still respected. The Terran formation emerged without ceremony, without salute, without even the token drift expected of returning exiles. 67 ships, silent, angular silhouettes, slid into the designated approach corridor as if the 4,900-vessel armada around them did not exist. Their engines burned at steady, unadorned thrust. No banners, no transponder bows, No acknowledgement of the Council's ritual welcome. The first violation. The first fracture. Councillor Wraith rose from his dais, mandibles flexing in irritation. They refused to decelerate for formal procession. His voice scraped the chamber's obsidian panels. They will halt or be halted. In the observation tier, diplomats murmured in agitation. 7 centuries of precedent demanded submission. Exiles always offered symbolic compliance when returning to the core. Always. Humanity's refusal rippled through the hall like a misaligned pulse. A hollow officer highlighted the Terran trajectory. They maintain a perfect 67-vessel line, no variance beyond 0.4 meters, no shift for salute protocols. Councillor Rez scoffed. Their ignorance of ceremony is expected. Their exile taught them nothing. But his crests shivered, betraying a flicker of doubt. The previous flare test, absorbed at 93%, redirected at 7%, still hung in his mind, unspoken but present. A punchline surfaced in the tension. They didn't come to bow. Inside the chamber, Ambassador Kahal of the Lythari pointed at a new telemetry spike. Look, they're ignoring the honor convoy. 12 council cruisers, sleek and silver, moved to escort the Terrans, forming the mandatory cradle for diplomatic entry. It was a centuries-old tradition. The returning race would drift at half-thrust, symbolically carried by the council's guardians. The humans rejected the gesture entirely. They accelerated. Not much, just 0.3 G above protocol, but enough to break the escort pattern cleanly. The cruisers scattered, choreography disrupted. Gasps rippled across the hall as elegant formation lines shattered like thin glass. Disrespect, Wraith hissed. They insult us in full view of 12 civilizations. The junior aide from earlier, eyes fixed on her console, spoke quietly. That wasn't disrespect. That was a message. Rez rounded on her. Explain. They raised their drives to avoid being enclosed. The words fell with weight. Enclosed was a military term, a warning term. Wraith dismissed it with irritation. You mistake coincidence for intent. But another officer, older and slower to speak, murmured, coincidence doesn't hold 0.4 meter formation variance under escort pressure. The chamber's lighting dimmed as the Terran flagship's silhouette expanded across the main display. Its hull, once dismissed as a relic, now seemed deliberate in its austerity. Brutal, geometric, built for function, not display. The delegates waited for the traditional greeting signal from the Terrans, a data pulse of identification, allegiance, and intent. It never came. Instead, a single encrypted packet pinged into the council network. Not a bow, not a plea, not a request for entry. A statement. Terran Union, returning by right, not permission. Half the chamber erupted. Outrage, confusion, alarm. The diplomatic observers surged into heated arguments, their voices overlapping in escalating disbelief. Security drones hovered higher, anticipating conflict. Even the holotechs stopped pretending neutrality. Wraith slammed his staff against the dais. We summon them for judgment and they declare themselves independent? His mandibles trembled with controlled fury. They arrive with 67 ships and they refuse every protocol, every tradition, every order. The aide whispered, maybe they didn't return to be judged. The Terran ships glide into the heart of council space, unescorted, unhindered, unshaken, drawing every eye in the hall towards the undeniable truth settling over them like cold gravity. Humanity had not come home as exiles. They had come home as an equal. The intimidation volley began with the confidence of an empire that had never been answered. 12 council cruisers glide ahead of the armada, emitter arrays unfolding like petals of polished steel. Their captains moved with ceremonial ease, prepared to deliver a controlled demonstration. Meant to humble the Terran line before negotiations even began. Tradition said it always worked. Exiles always bent. But the 67 Terran ships held formation so precisely that the void itself seemed carved around them. No drift, no hesitation, no reaction to the thousands of weapons now charging before them. Counselor Vraith raised his hand. Begin the flare. Let them remember their place. The first beam ignited, an incandescent arc brighter than any sunrise, engineered to rattle shields and rattle nerves. 11 more joined it in the same heartbeat. Their convergence formed a spear of white and violet energy that hammered forward with 4.3 terajoules of ceremonial force. An aide whispered nervously, "Impact in 3 seconds." Vraith leaned forward, certain of the outcome. They will fall back. They always do. The flare struck the Terran line. The hull waited for fractures, shields buckling, reactor signatures flaring, retreat patterns activating. Any sign that the exiles remembered fear. Instead, the screens froze. 93% absorbed, 7% redirected. Unchanged formation. A single punchline snapped through the silence. Fire failed. On the tactical display, the redirected energy spilled outward in a clean, curved arc, guided, not scattered, washing around the nearest cruisers without touching their hulls. It wasn't a shield, it wasn't brute resistance. It was shaping, purposeful, designed. Counselor Rez spoke first, voice thin. Their technology never did this, not before the exile, not ever. The aide's eyes widened as new data scrolled. They didn't block it, they handled it, as if the beam were expected. Vraith snapped. They are relics. Their archives show nothing capable of adaptive shaping. But doubt seeped into his tone. Numbers did not obey pride. The Terran flagship slowly adjusted its bearing by 0.002 degrees, a movement so precise it registered as deliberate defiance. The 66 ships beside it shifted in perfect synchrony, keeping that impossibly tight 0.4-meter variance. Another stinger descended. Your intimidation is obsolete. Across the chamber, the diplomatic tier erupted into argument. Some shouted for immediate escalation. Others demanded restraint. A few simply stared at the display as if seeing humanity for the first time in their lives. The 12 cruisers that fired the flare recoiled in confusion. Their captains scrambled to analyze what had happened, sending frantic queries up the chain of command. None found answers. Their weapons had struck. Their energy had been delivered. The Terrans had simply reshaped physics around it. Vraith forced himself upright. They insult us publicly, return fire at double amplitude, force compliance. But the elder officer, gray-spined, slow-breathing, spoke with a rare caution. Counselor, if that shaping can scale, doubling amplitude may only give them more to redirect. The chamber quieted, fear threading between the seats. Outside, the Terran ships did nothing. No weapons charged, no formations shifted. They simply held their line, calm and unthreatened, as though waiting patiently for the Council to realize its error. A moral weight settled beneath the silence. The humans had not retaliated. They had shown restraint far greater than the Council had. The aide whispered what everyone felt but dared not say. They didn't fire back. They're choosing not to. Vraith clenched his mandibles. That restraint ends now. They will kneel. But as the displays flickered, as the Terran signatures remained unshaken, the truth resonated through every corner of the hall like a quiet verdict. The first reversal had already arrived, and humanity had not even raised its voice. The first hint of the doctrine appeared as a tremor in the sensor feeds, so small the Council mistook it for drift. The 67 Terran vessels, still silent after absorbing the flare, began adjusting their vector by fractions of a degree. Not evasive, not aggressive, just aligning. Every delegate in the chamber leaned forward, expecting negotiation protocols to resume. Instead, the flagship dimmed its primary drives for 0.4 seconds, a strange gesture that made no tactical sense. Then the engines reignited. The acceleration spike hit like a fault line snapping across space. 18.7 G. Sustained, precise, unified. A punchline burned through the comm feed. Trajectory rewrite initiated. The council hall erupted in disbelief as the Terran formation surged forward, not breaking shape, not shedding stragglers, just cutting a clean vector through the center of the containment grid. Automated council safeties screeched warnings. Predictive models collapsed under the sheer velocity shift. Rez scrambled upright. They can't hold formation at that thrust. No species can. But the Terrans did. All 67 ships maintained that razor 0.4-meter variance as their engines delivered forces that should have torn lesser hulls apart. Their silhouettes elongated across the tactical display, leaving the Council's elegant armada struggling to respond. Wraith barked, close the flank, deploy the wall. 900 ships, sleek, gold-latticed interceptors, moved to seal the vector. They formed a broad arc meant to corral the exiles, each vessel projecting an overlapping net of gravitic dampers. It was a system refined over centuries. No fleet had ever passed through it. The human formation didn't slow, didn't hesitate, didn't even acknowledge the wall. They accelerated again, 18.7 G to 19.1 G for 1.2 seconds. The wall buckled. A retention stinger fell like a blade. Your models can't predict us. The first contact wasn't a collision, it was a failure of expectation. Terran ships streaked through the dampers, their trajectories slipping between projected fields with micrometric precision. Sensors overloaded as human vessels cut through the flanking net like stones through mist. Council officers shouted over one another. How are they threading it? Their vectors aren't reacting to our gravity wells. Are they compensating manually? No species calculates that fast. No species. But the data told the truth. Every Terran ship ran thousands of micro-adjustments per second, slipping past intercept points that should have been unescapable. Their engines maintained thrust lines that defied every simulation the Council relied on. In 4 seconds, just 4, the 900-ship flanking wall shattered into disorder. Interceptors spiraled off course, their formations collapsing into overlapping arcs of confusion. None were destroyed, none were struck. Humanity had cut straight through them without firing a shot. Rez stared, stunned. They didn't kill anyone. The aide whispered, that was intentional. Wraith slammed his staff against the dais. They humiliate us. They threaten the Council with speed alone. But the elder officer, gray-spined, slow-breathing, spoke with a rare caution. Counselor, if that shaping can scale, doubling amplitude may only give them more to redirect. The chamber quieted, fear threading between the seats. Outside, the Terran ships did nothing. No weapons charged, no formations shifted. They simply held their line, calm and unthreatened, as though waiting patiently for the Council to realize its error. A moral weight settled beneath the silence. The humans had not retaliated. They had shown restraint far greater than the Council had. The aide whispered what everyone felt but dared not say. They didn't fire back. They're choosing not to. Wraith clenched his mandibles. That restraint ends now. They will kneel. But as the displays flickered, as the Terran signatures remained unshaken, the truth resonated through every corner of the hall like a quiet verdict. The first reversal had already arrived, and humanity had not even raised its voice. The first hint of the doctrine appeared as a tremor in the sensor feeds, so small the Council mistook it for drift. The 67 Terran vessels, still silent after absorbing the flare, began adjusting their vector by fractions of a degree. Not evasive, not aggressive, just aligning. Every delegate in the chamber leaned forward, expecting negotiation protocols to resume. Instead, the flagship dimmed its primary drives for 0.4 seconds, a strange gesture that made no tactical sense. Then the engines reignited. The acceleration spike hit like a fault line snapping across space. 18.7 G. Sustained, precise, unified. A punchline burned through the comm feed. Trajectory rewrite initiated. The council hall erupted in disbelief as the Terran formation surged forward, not breaking shape, not shedding stragglers, just cutting a clean vector through the center of the containment grid. Automated council safeties screeched warnings. Predictive models collapsed under the sheer velocity shift. Rez scrambled upright. They can't hold formation at that thrust. No species can. But the Terrans did. All 67 ships maintained that razor 0.4-meter variance as their engines delivered forces that should have torn lesser hulls apart. They're still then a heartbeat long. One cycle. One perfect kinetic release. A punchline carved across the display. Target lock resolved. The shot crossed the grid before any council sensor could track it. It didn't aim at a ship. It aimed at a line, a vector of pressure cutting between 6 interceptors holding a redundant barrier. They thought themselves safe, clustered inside their overlapping shields. The projectile slid between them with surgical indifference. Micro-shockwaves followed. 6 hulls destabilized, not destroyed, but shoved violently out of formation. Their dampers overloaded instantly, sending them spinning into safe mode shutdowns. No fatalities, no fireballs, just the abrupt, undeniable collapse of a defensive node. Counselor Wraith staggered forward. That was not a ceremonial system, that was a weapon. Rez stared at the cascading data. A kinetic lance at that speed shouldn't be able to choose disruption over kill. But the numbers didn't lie. Cycle rate, 0.06 sec. Impact force, distributed. Casualties, 0. A second pulse, then a third. The Terran fleet unleashed a storm. 67 rails firing in offset micro-timings, each round passing within meters of Council cruisers, each choosing to break formations rather than bodies. Kill lines, not kill shots. Disabling precision so exact, the chamber fell silent. A retention stinger cracked like cold iron. Dominance quantified. 9 more Council ships lost formation integrity. Their shields flared, confused by the non-lethal kinetic impacts threading through their seams. Gravitic sails buckled, forcing emergency cutoff. Pilots who had never tasted fear suddenly found it dripping down the back of their throats. Wraith spat, return fire, full charge. But the elder officer stepped forward, voice grave. Counselor, firing at that density risks hitting our own ships. Their positioning, it's deliberate. On screen, Terran vessels shifted again. Tiny 0.02-degree vector corrections, enabling new firing lines no Council AI could counter. Predictive models collapsed under the complexity. One officer whispered, "They're writing the battlefield." Another cycle rippled outward. Another. 0.0 seconds. 0.0 seconds. 0. seconds. 23 Council ships spiraled out of control. Disabled, but intact. Not one casualty recorded. Not one explosion allowed. Every strike precise. Every round a message. Rez's voice broke. Why aren't they killing us? The aide, hands trembling above her console, answered softly. Because they don't need to. They're proving they can. The Council had seen energy absorbed. They had seen acceleration mastery. But this was different. This was calculated restraint, shaped with the edge of a blade. Humanity wasn't avoiding bloodshed out of weakness. They were choosing it from a position of absolute command. The Terran flagship halted its barrage as suddenly as it began. Silence swallowed the hull. Disabled Council ships drifted harmlessly. Systems recalibrated. Lives by the thousands had been spared by human intent. One final synchronized pulse flickered across Terran hulls, an echo of discipline, not threat. The message was unmistakable. Humanity controlled the tempo, the battlefield, and the outcome. And now the Council had to face the truth written in every clean, surgical kinetic line. The Exiles could end this fight at any moment. They simply hadn't chosen to. The chamber's lights dimmed as the Terran flagship finally opened a channel. Calm, unhurried, utterly in control. After the 0.06-second storm, after the collapse of flanking walls and intimidation volleys, the Council expected demands, threats, ultimatums. Instead, the Terran transmission began with a single sentence, delivered in a level, surgical tone. 3 of our frontier systems are gone. No flourish. No accusation. Just the truth laid bare. A hush settled over the hall. Even Wraith paused mid-breath. The phrase frontier systems carried weight. Worlds along the dark periphery, where old maps blurred and unknown forces lingered. Rez straightened slowly. Destroyed? By whom? The Terran envoy, Admiral Hale, a quiet figure framed by austere steel, tilted his head. We do not yet know, but we recovered nothing. No distress signals, no debris, only expanding clouds of metallic dust. The numbers appeared beside him. 3 systems lost, 1.2 billion missing, 0 survivors recovered. A punchline cut through the stillness. This is why we returned. Delegates shifted uneasily. For 7 centuries, they had treated humanity as a contained threat, a quarantine species permitted to grow only within narrow boundaries. But now those boundaries held 31,000 worlds, each one forged under exile, discipline, and independence. Worlds the Council had assumed irrelevant. Admiral Hale continued, voice steady. We did not come to challenge your fleets. We came to report the disappearance of entire sectors and to demand accountability for your silence. Wraith spat. Silence? You were exiled. Your borders were closed by decree. We owed you no. Your scouts were in our space 2 weeks before the first system vanished. Hale's tone didn't rise. It didn't need to. Stunned murmurs erupted. Rez turned sharply to his aides. Is this true? They exchanged terrified glances, unsure how much had been redacted from civilian channels. Hale continued. During our exile, we built an empire of 31,000 worlds. Diverse, stable, peaceful. We built it without your wars, without your hierarchies, without your slave trade corridors. His eyes glinted, cold, factual. And now something is erasing those worlds. A retention stinger fell like quiet judgment. Your abuses end today. The Council erupted. Protests, denials, exposed fears. Old powers with centuries of arrogance tried to reassert control, drowning in their own noise. But the Terran envoy's voice cut cleanly through it. You called us relics, primitive, processable. He glanced at the sensor locks flickering behind him. 67 ships holding perfect formation, while 4,900 Council warships drift in disarray. We chose restraint. You chose intimidation. Rez tried to regain ground. You disabled our ships. You shattered our flanks. And killed no one, Hale answered. We showed you only enough force to make you listen. Because justice matters. Because every life matters. Even yours. The chamber fell into uneasy quiet. Hale projected new data. Dust clouds expanding across erased star systems. Energy signatures with known origin. Sensor anomalies that predated the Council's decision to exile humanity centuries ago. You feared us. You feared what we would become. But something far older approaches your borders, and in your fear, you hid it from the galaxy. Wraith tried to speak, but his voice cracked on the first syllable. Hale ended with a single measured sentence. 3 systems are gone. If we stand divided, more will follow. The Terran channel closed. No threats, no boasting, only a moral line drawn with absolute clarity. The Council stared at the silent display, finally confronting a truth carved into every number before them. Humanity had not returned seeking permission. They had returned seeking justice. The Terran envoy did not return immediately to the channel. Instead, the flagship projected a slow, solemn cascade of archival footage. Grainy at first, then sharpening into clarity as decades unfolded. The Council chamber dimmed, shadows stretching across the obsidian floor as the first image appeared. A barren world, under a red dwarf sun, its surface carved by storms and loneliness.
A line of text hovered beneath it. Year 0 of exile. Then another world. Then another. Then thousands. The displays expanded until the entire chamber was wrapped in the quiet sprawl of human endurance. Admiral,
Hale's voice returned, measured, unwavering. When your 9 species voted to cast us out, we were fractured, small, still learning how to stand among the stars. Exile changed that. The screen zoomed out, mapping the growth of a civilization in real time. 31,000 worlds blooming across dark space. Trade lanes spanning light years. Colony rings encircling cold suns. These were not crafted with your oversight, Hale continued. They were forged under necessity. Isolation demanded discipline. Uncertainty demanded preparation. A punchline struck cleanly. 7 centuries demanded evolution. The chamber whispered with shifting breaths. Even Wraith fell still as the next sequence unfolded. Training ranges carved into asteroids, orbital academies lit by cold blue thrusters, ranks of pilots drilling acceleration maneuvers beyond tolerance lines. Data overlays scrolled across the air. 700 years of drills, constant rotation cycles, doctrines calibrated to unknown threats. Rez exhaled in disbelief. They prepared for war all this time? Hale's image appeared again, expression unreadable. We prepared for survival. You exiled us to die slowly in the dark, so we learned to live there. The display shifted. Massive silhouettes emerged, too large at first to comprehend. Hulls like mountain ranges. Engine arrays that glowed with the intensity of newborn stars. Weapon spines running kilometers long. The Spine Fleet. 1,400 dreadnoughts, each one a continent of armored resolve. Gasps rippled through the chamber. They built these in exile? No oversight? No treaties? How did they hide this scale? Hale's tone did not waver. Your borders kept you ignorant, not safe. A retention stinger fell like a slow, deliberate hammer. You exiled a species. You created an empire. Footage rolled, dreadnoughts rising from foundry worlds, their hulls shaped by generations of engineers who had never known a galaxy where humanity was accepted. Each vessel identical in discipline, yet unique in lineage. Families who had served aboard for centuries. Traditions born from hardship. Precision inherited, not taught. These ships were not built for conquest, Hale said. They were built because we had no allies, because if the unknown ever reached us, we would face it alone. The aide in the council gallery whispered, "That's why their maneuvers, their formations, everything feels rehearsed." Hale nodded. Because it is. Exile forced unity, unity forged doctrine, doctrine shaped the Spine Fleet. The dreadnoughts aligned in the projection, a wall of steel and resolve stretching across the void, engines burning at identical cadence. Even the Council's most advanced cruisers seemed fragile in comparison. Wraith's voice trembled. All this, hidden, for what purpose? To survive something older than your empire, Hale answered. Something your scouts saw but buried in your archive centuries ago. The holographic display dimmed, leaving only the silhouettes of the 1,400 dreadnoughts arrayed like sentinels. 7 centuries of isolation had not broken humanity. It had tempered them. And now, the galaxy would finally understand what the exile had created. The Council Armada moved first, because pride always moved first. After the revelations of exile, after the dreadnought silhouettes darkened the chamber's air, the old power snapped back to what they understood: overwhelming numbers and rehearsed intimidation. The order rippled out from the command tier, angry, brittle, desperate. 4,900 ships surged into an attack lattice designed to crush entire rebellions. They never considered that humanity had seen worse in the dark. Admiral Hale spoke only 3 words across the Terran command net. Begin controlled dismantling. The Terran formation shifted,
Not aggressively, not in rage, but with the same impossible precision the Council still refused to understand. 0.4-meter variance, synchronized vectoring, engines humming in calm resonance. 67 ships locked into assault geometry, while the spine fleet remained silent at the periphery, observing like steel judges. Then the storm began. The first Terran salvo hit a wedge of Council destroyers, not to kill, but to break. 7 kinetic rounds threaded the exact seam lines between their gravitic sails. Shields inverted, engines sputtered. All 7 fell out of formation in under 0.3 seconds, drifting but intact. A punchline cracked the tension. Force without blood. The Council panicked. Entire wings fired uncoordinated barrages, beams lancing blindly through their own formations. Terran ships slipped through the chaos at 18.7 G, executing micro-rotations that made the beams look slow, almost ceremonial. Another pulse of rail cycles, 0.06 seconds apart, precise like a metronome. 12 cruisers lost weapon control. 9 more lost navigation arrays. Not a single hull breached. Terror grew not from destruction, but from restraint. Rez shouted over the rising panic. They're disabling us by choice. They're choosing where we fall. Outside, Terran vessels wove patterns through the armada, clean arcs drawn with lethal understanding and merciful intent. Every Council formation collapse was intentional, calculated to avoid fatalities. Every drifting hull was a spared life. A retention stinger fell with cold finality. Dominance does not require death. Wraith slammed his fist against the dais as the next wave hit. 38 ships disabled by synchronized kinetic pulses that forced shield harmonics to overload in harmless bursts. Pilots inside screamed as their systems failed, but none burned, none died. "Fire everything," Wraith roared. But the command only hastened the unraveling. A swarm of Council frigates launched a devastating barrage toward the Terran line, hundreds of beams converging into a killing field. Humanity's answer was a single coordinated maneuver. The entire Terran formation dipped by 0.002 degrees, letting the Council's barrage carve nothing but vacuum. Hale's voice spoke across the surrendered channels. "Your formations are predictable. Your doctrines outdated. Your arrogance expensive." Terran vessels returned fire, light-touch kinetic lines that swept through the final defensive cordons. 62 ships dropped shields. 120 entered emergency spinlock. Hundreds more drifted powerless, intact but defeated. And then it was over. Not with explosions, not with screams, with silence. The Council's once glorious armada, 4,900 strong, now floated in paralyzed clusters, engines dead, weapons offline, crews shaken but alive. Terran ships hovered formation above them, untouched, unreadable. Wraith sank into his seat, mandibles trembling. Why spare us? Admiral Hale gave the answer calmly, clearly, unshakably. We came to stop whatever is erasing worlds, not to erase you. Humanity had dismantled the largest fleet in the core without crossing the line into massacre. And that truth, more than any kinetic strike, unraveled the last illusion of Council superiority. Power could kill, but restraint defined fear. And the Council had never feared humanity more. The battlefield fell quiet long before the Council's arrogance did. The wreckage they expected, burning hulls, drifting corpses, shattered fleets, never came. Instead, 4,900 ships floated powerless but whole, cradled by emergency fields and intact life support systems. The Terran formation hovered above them like a verdict rendered in steel. No shots fired now, no maneuvers, only silence that pressed harder than any weapon. The Council waited for execution. Humanity offered terms. Admiral Hale reopened the channel, voice steady, even gentle. "We will now begin recovery. No prisoners will be harmed. Prepare for stabilization protocols." It struck the chamber harder than any kinetic impact. Rez rose in disbelief. You defeated the core armada and you refuse to claim spoils? We refuse to commit atrocities. That is your habit.
Legacy, not ours. A punchline dropped into the stunned quiet. Mercy is not weakness. Terran drones deployed, small craft marked with medical insignia, gliding toward disabled council ships. They transmitted triage codes, docking routes, and life support diagnostics. Not a weapon among them, not a threat, just help. For many in the Armada, it was the first time they had seen mercy from a superior force. Wraith hissed, "This is manipulation, a performance." Hale answered with the same calm precision that shattered fleets. "This is justice, and justice requires transparency." The displays shifted to a new set of documents, declassified reports pulled from Council archives. Evidence of centuries-old exploitations, forced labor in border systems, punitive levies on developing species, and the covert deployment of discipline fleets against colonies unable to pay tribute. The room grew colder with every revelation. "These practices end today," Hale said. "The galaxy will have open governance or none at all." A retention stinger hollowed, sharp and clean. Reform is non-negotiable. Rez trembled. "You demand we dismantle our governing order?" "We demand trials," Hale said simply, "starting with the 9 delegates who voted to exile an entire species without cause, and concealed the anomaly that has now erased 3 systems." The chamber erupted, shouts of outrage, panic, denial, yet none could argue the evidence scrolling across their terminals. The Terrans had not forged accusations, they had revealed the Council's own buried sins. "Reparations will be scaled," Hale continued, "not in wealth, but in service, rebuilding the destroyed frontier worlds, providing resources for displaced populations, and funding an independent investigative body for abuses of power. You will not lose your civilization. You will simply lose your impunity." The aide, trembling but resolute, spoke for the first time in open forum. "And if we refuse?" Hale didn't threaten. He didn't raise his tone. "You saw what 67 ships did. The Spine Fleet carries 1,400 dreadnoughts. We choose peace. Choose it with us." The hall froze. The delegates looked to the tactical feed. Their armada crippled but alive. Terran vessels standing in disciplined stillness. Drones assisting wounded crews without hesitation. Mercy was a mirror, and every council species saw its reflection clearly. One by one, the delegates lowered their crests, mandibles, tendrils, whatever gesture meant capitulation in their language. Wraith spoke last, voice hollow. "We accept oversight. We accept reforms. We accept trial." Hale nodded once. No triumph, no cruelty. Only acknowledgement. Then the galaxy begins again. The Terran channel closed, leaving the Council in a silence shaped not by defeat, but by a new kind of order, one forged not through fear, but through earned authority. Humanity had conquered without killing. Now they would rebuild what fear had broken. The first sensor ping came as the Council delegation signed the final reform accords. Soft, distant, almost dismissible. A single ripple across the deepest bands of the Terran long-range array. Admiral Hale paused mid-sentence. His gaze shifted toward the tactical hollow as a faint red marker bloomed at the far edge of the map, far beyond the rim, far beyond any known corridor. The Council chamber tightened. After everything, trials, reparations, surrender, none were ready for a new unknown. The sensor officer spoke carefully. Deep field returns, matching no vessel class, no sublight profile, no warp signature. It isn't moving in space, it's expanding. A projection surfaced, a slow, pulsing sphere of distortion. Diameter 1,600 kilometers. Rate of growth 0.7 per hour.
The same readings found in the dust clouds of the 3 lost systems. A punchline flashed like a blade. It's back. Hale dismissed the general channel and opened a secure Terran line. Confirm location. Coordinates aligned with the ancient perimeter markers, replied another officer. The same border where Council scouts vanished 7 centuries ago. The words dropped like stones in water, sending ripples through every mind in the chamber. 7 centuries, the start of exile, the beginning of their fear. The timing wasn't coincidence. Rez swallowed hard. You said we hid something? Something old? Something we feared? Was it this? The Terran envoy didn't answer with speculation. He answered with evidence. Hale projected a final set of declassified archives, files ripped from encrypted Council vaults during the surrender. Holograms flickered to life. Ancient sensor logs, centuries-old distress calls, ghost signals from ships that vanished along the rim. All pointing to the same anomaly, all filed under a classification long buried beneath political shame. It was the real reason for the exile, not fear of humanity, fear of what humanity had stumbled near. A retention stinger cut through the rising dread. Your exile was a wall. Delegates murmured, horrified. Wraith stared at the footage as if seeing his own guilt crystallize. We believed isolating you would keep the anomaly from awakening. It reacted to your probes, to your expansion. His voice cracked. We acted out of terror. Hale didn't soften the truth. You built a barrier out of a species, and now the thing you feared has grown beyond your imagination. The anomaly pulsed again, its radius increasing by another 12 kilometers during the exchange. The feed showed nothing inside it. No star, no matter, just an expanding void, dissolving space into particulate dust. Council officers whispered urgently, "What does it want? Is it a weapon? Is it alive? Can it be stopped?" Hale spoke with a calm forged by 7 centuries of preparation. We don't know what it is, but we know what it does. And we know what it leaves behind. He gestured to the map, 3 empty systems, each erased cleanly. The metallic dust clouds spinning where worlds lived. The absence of survivors. The absence of time-stamped final transmissions. There is no diplomacy here, Hale said quietly. No negotiation, no doctrine but survival. Rez steadied himself. And you intend, what, to fight it alone? Hale exhaled once. We trained for isolation, but we will not repeat your mistake. Every display brightened as Terran signatures flooded onto the tactical map. 1,400 dreadnoughts, dozens of carrier groups, thousands of escort vessels, the full spine fleet activating for deployment. The chamber shook, not from fear, but from a shared realization. Humanity wasn't rising to claim the galaxy. Humanity was rising to save it. Hale closed with a final measured line, the only one the moment deserved. The anomaly wakes, and this time we face it together.